Got quorum online. We'll go to Dave. Dave Paul, kia ora. Thank you. So we've got the unitary plan, private plan change request from Fletcher Development, rezoning some land Silverdale West to light industry. If you could just introduce yourselves and your roles to the committee, and then we can get into the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm Dave Paul, Senior Policy Planner in the North Western Islands team. Peter Barry's with me as team leader of the same team, and we've got Lee T from Healthy Waters in case there's any stormwater type questions. I've just got a short presentation to take you through. This item is about introducing a private plan change request to rezone some land at Silverdale West from future urban to industrial. Now just, if I get this right. Okay, so the area that we're talking about is located where the little red triangle is, but that just sets the context of where this land sits in the wider future urban zone that lies to the west of the State Highway 1 on the highway Hibiscus Coast, basically from Dairy Flat right through to just north of Orewa. So it's quite close to the, I'll actually go on to the next. Oh, just before that, the private plan change has been lodged by a consortium of Fletcher Development and Fulton Hogan, who own land within the plan change area, and it's in the Rodney Local Board area. This plan change is a little bit different to some of the others you may have seen, which it's only introducing industrial land. There's no residential land with this, and I'll talk about that a bit more as I go through the presentation. Just zooming in a little bit more closely on the area, it sits between State Highway 1 and Dairy Flat Highway, just to the south of the Silverdale interchange, and it comes, as you can see on the map, just not about 2/3 of the way down Dairy Flat Highway towards Wilkes Road. There's 107 hectares in the area that the private plan change covers. So the current zoning is future urban, and the proposal is to rezone it, as I've said before, business light industry. This area was identified by the former Rodney District Council and many years ago now as being a potential future industrial area. So it's kind of not new. And in fact, the council did a Silverdale West Industrial Area Structure Plan, which was adopted in 2020, which covered a bigger area than this, and the plan change area sits within what was identified as the stage 1 area in that structure plan. The land's also identified in the future development strategy to be development ready or to be rezoned in 2030 plus, subject to some infrastructure requirements, but those infrastructure requirements are for the full build out of the whole stage 1 area, not just this plan change area. And there is a line sort of in the future development strategy which says that the existing infrastructure capacity can be used and development could occur sooner. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through as well. So the private plan change includes a new precinct and a new precinct plan. There's also been work on a stormwater catchment management plan, and that's been worked on. There's been input from our Healthy Waters team into that stormwater management plan so that it can be adopted further down the track, and the development then can now operate under the network discharge consent for the area. Flooding can largely be and is intended to be contained within the plan change area and managed within the plan change area. And if there's any questions on that, Lee can assist with the approach to that. The precinct itself includes a number of particular provisions around the street network. There's identification for possibly increased height areas through the plan change area. There's planted setbacks included along the motorway frontage and along the Dairy Flat Highway frontage. And there'll be provisions in the precinct around stormwater management, riparian protection, flood management. And there's also, critically, infrastructure staging triggers, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail shortly. The proposal involves upgrades of existing roads and intersections adjoining the plan change area, and it proposes a new internal roading network within the plan change area. Now it's proposed that the development be staged so that there's a sequence of transport upgrades required, and only a certain amount of the land can be developed subject to those transport infrastructure upgrades being in place before the development can actually be occupied. And then there's a sequence of progressively increasing the area with additional transport infrastructure upgrades occurring. And development can't proceed to another stage unless those transport upgrades are completed. A new wastewater network will also be needed, and the precinct provisions require connection to a wastewater network, and basically the long-term proposal will be that the area connects to the existing Milldale network, which is already constructed. There's Watercare have advised that there could be capacity constraints at the Army Bay treatment plant where the wastewater from this area will end up going, and those could occur from around 2028, but the treatment plant is planned to be upgraded from 2031. So if the developer wants to go ahead of that Army Bay treatment plant being upgraded, and if there's no capacity at the treatment plant, then it would be a non-complying resource consent for the applicant to look at alternative options. And that could potentially be viable in the short term, because it'll be a few years before the land and buildings could actually even be constructed and occupied. And even then, there would be quite small numbers of businesses establishing and quite low employee numbers. So the quantity of waste could potentially be managed by alternative methods if a treatment plant hasn't been upgraded. The developer's already indicated the willingness to fund the infrastructure, and there'll need to be ongoing discussions with the DPO around that infrastructure funding. So what we're asking you today, it's recommended that the committee accept the private plan change request, and if it is, we would then go on and publicly notify it for submissions, and then it would go through a hearing process. That was all I had, Mr. Chair.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you for the work on this again and the speed these things come at us. I do have some recommendations I'll move, and Councillor Walker, I think, would like to second. Just to note, there's a D, which we normally do, to add a council submission where we're able to add our concerns around the infrastructure requirements, including water care and those issues. So I'll go to questions first, starting with Councillor Walker, and then Councillor Sayers is after that.
Sure. So I've got a few questions, Mr. Chair. If it's okay, I'm just going to run them all very quickly, and you can generate a response. So in respect of the documentation that we've got, it doesn't mention some things. For example, it doesn't mention the Northwest Wild Link, which is the notion of an ecological corridor stretching from Tiri-Tiri-Matangi, effectively across this area and over to the Waitakaris. Just what the status is of that, I don't know, but it has in the past been in a number of documents. There was also an earlier document around a green cloak, and I can't remember what the Maori name for that was. That was the notion of a screen along the state highway as a buffer. That documentation existed in the old Rodney District Council. And earlier yet, there was the concept of a green belt to separate the Hibiscus Coast from the North Shore. So that's just historical, but it just goes to the significance of this area. So just following on from that, there are a number of things that flow. One is the necessity for a corridor buffer along the state highway that has got sufficient depth for a gradation of planting so that there's screening that's desirable, especially if you've got taller buildings. The other important thing obviously goes to protecting the riparian and existing wetlands and the like within the area. The other issue of concern is around stormwater. It's not called Dairy Flat for nothing. And I note that John Creek, which is the drainage creek that discharges, is throttled in 2 locations, and that anticipates, and it's in the documentation, that will mean that stormwater backs up. So it's really critical that stormwater is managed, and that goes to the freeboarding of buildings, but also the way that the drainage network is contemplated. And one of the concerns that I've got that's come out of the recent flood events, I would suggest, is the necessity for treating roads as overland flow paths, because they can be very efficient if they're designed in that respect, and to encourage as much permeability as possible. The other concern I've got and is around open space provisions, and yes, it's proposed that there's open space around riparian areas, but even people that work often want to enjoy some park space in the vicinity, and there'll be a lot of people working in this area. So previously there would have been open space for residential, but that doesn't apply in the zoning that we have light commercial and light, but I would suggest that there's still a place for it. So I just put that up.
Kia ora, Councillor Walker, maybe we'll just
and the last question I've got, and it's been mentioned, goes to sewage. There's the capacity of the Army Bay plant, but equally there's the limited pipeline and pumping capacity down the Whangapara Peninsula. And just what constraint that imposes, given all the development that's happening around the area, I don't know, but I would signal that, because the cost of upgrading that is horrific in terms of the disruption and the costs of running a pipeline all the way down the peninsula at huge cost in terms of power alone to pump all that shit to a location right at the end and after treatment discharging into the channel. So they're the issues that I'm raising, Mr. Chair. I've already given the officers a heads up, so your response, Dave. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. That's quite a lot of things, but I think with your history you should be able to answer most of those things for the committee.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. On the wildlife link, that was part of the and recognised and acknowledged in the structure plan that was done, which has sort of been a guide to the plan change requirements, and I guess the riparian margin planting and the addition of an area of SEA as part of the plan change help go towards providing that continuity of link. And then as more areas get developed in the structure plan area for the wider industrial area, those links and networks can be better established. The green cloak and the corridor buffer, that is addressed in the plan change, and again was in the structure plan, and that's why there's a significantly wider planted buffer required along the Hibiscus Coast Highway, and our landscape architect has been involved in looking at and promoting that and making sure that's clearly identified in the plan, and there's some plans specifying the widths of how that corridor should be provided. The greenbelt concept, well, that's kind of been yeah, coming, but, yeah, yeah, the green belt that, well, what's left of a green belt is now if I can, this area through here between the edge of the North Shore and the southern part of the future urban zone. I mean, that's got shrunk by the virtue of the addition of the future urban zones through the last IHP process. So that kind of there's a reason why the rub boundary's where it is, and that's partly on topography and vegetation and that to retain that buffer between the North Shore and the future urban zone. Riparian margins, they're a critical part of the proposed development, and well, in fact, at this point, I can hand over to Lee from Healthy Waters to address the questions on stormwater.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the answers don't have to be very long, Dave. So.
The answers are trying to be fulsome to a very, very long question. So I think it's important that the information comes to us if you want to know it, Councillor. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So just like you were saying, the John Creek plays a major part in that area as a stormwater, as part of the stormwater network, and it flows into a sensitive environment. So water quality treatment is important, and it is required that all impervious area be treated, and that's outlined in the stormwater management plan. The stormwater management plan also proposes stormwater wetlands, and that will manage the extreme 1 in 100 year events in those situations. And like you said, they also are proposing structures in the stream to manage flood as well. And like you said, there are risks with it blocking or overflowing. And Dave was saying that there are riparian, the proposal is providing riparian margins that do also include the floodplain. So if there is blockages, it goes into a safe area. And yeah, so the stream will be protected, and the stormwater will be managed on the plan change area. Thanks. Oh, and the freeboard. With the freeboard, when it comes to the design, that will need to meet design requirements, and that does take into consideration appropriate freeboard levels.
Thank you very much.
So the last two questions were around open space other than riparian margins. The plan change doesn't provide for that at the moment, but it's a bit of a vexed issue between parks and the whole obtaining land and the ongoing ability to maintain it becomes an issue. But I think we could look at, and through the submission process, we may be able to address that more specifically. There is an area of open space identified, at least for a pedestrian connection at Dairy Flat Highway end, whether something a little bit more could be made of that as a possibility. On the sewage capacity, the only advice we've had from Watercare in the context of this proposal is the capacity at the wastewater treatment plant rather than the pipeline to the treatment plant. So they haven't raised that as an issue in the context of this plan change. It may be a wider issue for development to the Hibiscus Coast as a whole, but not in the context of this plan change.
Thank you. Next up, Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Richard. You just turned my camera on. Just two. I'm supportive of the plan change. It is in the Rodney ward, just on that side of the motorway, and my questions are just probably clarification ones. If these items should be included in part of the resource consenting or not, and one's around transport and one's around water care. The question around water care, it's quite possible that the existing capacity will allow the growth in this area that the developer wants to achieve without having to build any of their own plant. That is a possibility, just depending how quickly that goes for them. But if they had to, my question is around if they had to invest into building their own temporary plant until the upgrades are completed by Watercare, that plant, does that have to be invested back to Watercare and the cost picked up by them, or typically does that just get disused and disassembled by the developer themselves. And the reason for the question, I think Watercare is a little bit, board of directors are becoming a little bit wary of taking on infrastructure built by other people rather than themselves, and the risks around that. So that's the first question, Chair, and then I've got another one around transport.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think if the situation arises where the developer would need to look at its own treatment options, I don't think they would be going to a treatment plant. I think the scale of the development that would occur in the period prior to the treatment plant capacity being upgraded could well work with individual septic tank systems for individual developments, or even an option that's been used in the past is just trucking waste off. Because the volumes would be so small, I don't think they would need to go to a treatment plant, and that's not what the developers have indicated to us would be an option if that scenario arose.
Yeah, okay, so trucking one kind of makes sense. If it happened to be septic tanks, Dave, still they wouldn't be considered to be vested back into Watercare in the future, would they? I wouldn't have thought so.
No. That wouldn't be my understanding, no.
No, okay. Look, thanks, that just clarifies that for me. The other one's around transport, and obviously there's being jobs created in that area and people needing to get to work. So I'm just wondering if you can clarify for me around, public transport and access of public transport services to that development. I am aware that in other areas in Rodney, with recent plan changes going through, I believe that we can add into those consents a requirement that a shuttle service or something similar to link up with the bus hubs is a possibility. And obviously with this, the position of this, it's kind of just on the other side of the motorway from a very large Auckland Transport bus station there. So is there any consideration for public transport being provided either by AT or that alternative by the developer themselves? And is that something that should be considered as a possibility?
Yeah, there's two aspects to answering that. First of all, the development itself, the roading network is designed to be able to accommodate public transport or the bus network when that's able to be provided to the area. We should also note that there's already a bus service that runs down Dairy Flat Highway anyway, from the Hibiscus station back to Albany. And that would be something that AT can address through the submission process, and it would be a conversation between the developers and AT once the area starts to develop to be able to bring public transport into that area. There's already a public transport or bus service operating in the Milldale area now, and could potentially extend across the New Argent Lane, Pine Valley Road into the plan change area. So there's two arguments to that. It's something that would come later, but the design of the roading network is such that it could accommodate public transport or bus network.
Okay, well that's great to know. Perhaps just if I could signal to you, Dave, to signal both Louise Johnson, the local board member who's looked at this yesterday, and myself, if you could just perhaps signal that at the appropriate stage in the process, that's something that we're both very interested in following through on. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman, and then Councillor Turner after that.
Thank you, Dave, for this work. Good afternoon. I have read the report and I've been listening carefully to your comments. I think you're being very diplomatic and nuanced around the capacity issues. My question really, and maybe it's an opportunity for someone to go out and phone Watercare, is has Watercare issued consents to effectively allocate all the remaining capacity at for the Army Bay wastewater treatment plant? Because if that's been allocated already, that's quite important. It's not about a capacity issue. It's have the consents been issued that effectively allocate everything already. If you don't know, that's something I'd like you to know for the submission.
No, the advice we've got is they anticipate if the rate of growth continues like it has for the last 5-10 years, they will reach capacity at 2028, and their priority is to service already zoned land. But depending on what happens with the growth in the next 5 years, it will influence whether that capacity is actually even reached at 2028.
I think that this will need to be really strongly addressed through the hearings process. But the question there, I just want a bit of comfort here, because I don't want to put Councillor Sayers crook if I've misinterpreted, but I disagree with him. I don't want to see trucking. I don't care how small the load of effluent. I would support a localised treatment plant that would have to be vested with Watercare, so up to the Watercare standards for the capacity for this location right now, because this plan change area is one thing, but after that comes Milldale, and there are major capacity constraints at Watercare signalling, and we're talking about an incremental option being a trucking solution, which I think is a terrible idea. So can you just clarify that we are wanting to get to a better standard than a trucking solution?
Before any alternative to the Army Bay wastewater treatment plant or the Watercare system was to be considered, there would have to be a non-complying resource consent process to go through. So it would be at that stage that the alternative would have to be considered. And remember that, as Dave has already said, that what we're talking about is industrial facility where there would be certainly a lot less density in terms of people using the facility than there would be in residential areas. So the volume of waste is likely to be much smaller. So trucking was something that is potential, but there are also, as Dave has said, there's the septic tanks or smaller package plants and so on. So there's no certainty that this will be the case. They will have to go through the resource consent process. We know that there is spare capacity at the moment, and Watercare have said in this instance, the applicants have shown to Watercare that there are ways they can service the land provided there is current capacity in the system. We know there's current capacity in the system at the moment. Projections say could be used up by 2028, but Watercare have a plan to upgrade the plant in 2031. So the gap could be relatively small if in fact there is a gap, and it really depends on the rate of growth over the next few years.
Thanks, Peter. I guess from my questioning, what I'm wanting is a degree of comfort, not so much in terms of what they are advocating, but in terms of what we are trying to hold to, because I think that this is an area that requires a great deal more resilience in its wastewater infrastructure than what is being mooted by the applicants here, and I want to see us try and fight for that through the hearings process. But thank you, Chair.
Yeah, just to add to that, and you virtually answered my next comment, and your last comment is that there's still a hearing process to go through, and Watercare have indicated that they will be a submitter, so those issues can be tested through the hearing process rather than trying to address them through this closed 25 process just to accept the plan change to get it to that stage.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you very much. And with all respect to the people who know the area a lot better than me, I'm just sort of ignited by you talking about tankering wastewater. You know, we sit in meetings here talking about saving carbon. I sit in the Watercare meetings. We've got 137 houses live in Red Hills. It could go to 400 before we get the facilities there and can stop tankering. Now that's just been put back in our long-term plan, their long-term stuff that I was looking at from 26 to 28. We're tankering out of Warkworth. We've got problems in Kumeu that we're tankering out of. Watercare gave up on our Waikato licence or our Waikato contract. They said so they could focus on the problems in Auckland. The Mayor says, let's get stuff finished before we start new stuff. And I'm sitting here trying to join all these comments together. I have no faith that you'll have your predictions of limited sewerage will be right, that your hopes that the gap between the supply, the infrastructure supply and the usage connect. I certainly have plenty of empirical evidence that it doesn't in West Auckland and other places. So why would we go down this track?
I think, well, keep in mind that this is...
Tell me the obvious that I'm not seeing. I'm quite happy to look stupid, except this looks silly to me. So
you're not stupid at all. And these are good questions, Councillor Turner. This is a private plan change which we have a required time frame that we have to respond. It's by a private developer coming to us. It's not us proposing this. But if there's additional question to that.
The precinct provisions they're just about as strong as we can get in terms of ensuring and requiring connection to a reticulated network. But if it happens that the plant capacity isn't there, there's a method for alternatives. Now, the trucking one may not stack up, and Board of Care have indicated that they're not keen on that from experience elsewhere. So the developer, if they want to be able to go ahead of the treatment plant capacity being provided, will have to come up with something that does satisfy and can work its way through the hearing process and then the resource consent process.
Can we strike out the stuff in advance that we wouldn't accept? Okay.
Well, there's nothing mentioned about those options. We've just highlighted those that there are possibilities. And again, it comes back to this Clause 25 stage. It's we're trying to litigate and solve all the problems at this stage when that's really for the hearing process to resolve. When we've got evidence from Water Care, we've got more evidence from the applicants. It's kind of not, this process isn't the step in the process to address those. The applicants demonstrated that, or indicated that there are alternative options available, and that doesn't lend itself to being a reason to for us to not progress it to the next stage at this point.
I do feel I'm going under sometimes, but anyway, thank you.
No, you're on the right track, Councillor. This is our problem, and we've said it with our recent decisions on appeals and things on other areas, is that we are continually stuck on this conveyor belt because this is coming to us. The Red Hills option 2 was a special housing area posed by a previous government that we didn't have a choice in either and gave that feedback at the time. So unfortunately, we're just forever reacting. But we try to work within the best parameters that we can impose, which will be part of our submission. Member Ashby.
Kia ora, thank you for the report. Just one question from me. Just as officers, what's your assessment, or could you give me some clarity on how this private plan change proposal, how it's given effect to including a cultural assessment that has A, identified the values on the landscape, B, identified sites if suitable for scheduling, and C, reflected mana whenua values. So you picked up on some of it, I think, to Councillor Walker's points in terms of the structure plan and the Northwest Link, which I imagine would be one of those items. So could you just speak to that in terms of how well the plan change has performed in delivering this is an RPS item?
The plan change and the precinct provisions have additional controls relating to the riparian margins, and the whole stormwater management side of things goes to addressing those values. I think they'd be, plus the identification of an SEA area. As the applicant identified an area of bush that met SEA standards, and that's been included to be added to the SEA layer. But it's mainly around, I think, the riparian and the stream work, and through the catchment management plan process that those values are sort of picked up and reflected.
So, is it your assessment that they've kind of, from the report, it looks like they haven't actually done what the RPS tells anyone to do doing a private plan change, which is, it's an instructive list of things that they must do, but that by happy circumstance they might have guesstimated their way into an approximation of hitting some of these values. Is that fair? I just can't see these directive provisions in the RPS reflected in the summary of the plan change.
I guess that level of detail again will be considered through the hearing process. It gets difficult. We get caught in this sort of position between this closed 25 stage and addressing those specific details that will be canvassed through the hearing process. But I don't think it's. I think it's a little bit unfair to suggest that it's by chance and by accident that some of those things are addressed. They do have a multifunctional response to dealing with the natural environment and the water quality, which happen to be mana whenua values as well.
Good, I think it's not really a matter of fairness, it's actually in Council's own unitary plan RPS. B6.5.2 subclause 7, which I've been quoting, so it's not really my substantive, my subjective opinion. This is a directive thing for plan change and structure plans. It's something I raise at this committee multiple times, and it's never in the private plan change proposals or in the officer report. It seems to be missed. So I'm saying, as officers who've looked at this, where is the advice around that?
Sorry, I'm not clear on which part of the RPS you're referring to.
I've just cited it. It's in the mana whenua chapter. It sounds from the answer that it hasn't been assessed and picked up, which is disappointing.
Sorry, I can't say that it hasn't. I'm not aware of whether it specifically has or not. It possibly is in the section 32 in the detailed assessment that the applicant did against the RPS, and then that will be addressed in the section, or the 42A report that the reporting planners will do to the hearing process. They will go through those RPS provisions.
Kapai. So, this is the last sort of point, because I don't think we're getting far. My job here on the behalf of the IMSB is to ask questions relevant, pertinent to Māori iwi values. The RPS is very instructive on this point. I've raised this multiple times again. So I would expect with plan changes and structure plans for the Māori impact statement to be very clear about how applications have given effect to this, again, very directive provision, which is one I look at, again, at every single one of these and table quite often at these PEP committees. So it looks to me like it hasn't been done, but I'm happy to take that offside to have get some clarity around it. But thank you.
Thanks, Member Ashby. We'll ensure that we have that information for when we discuss the submission with whoever the member from Hokura is on that as well. So thank you for that. I have no more questions. Happy to maybe just quick brief clarification. This doesn't meet the threshold for a reject, does it? So we get questioned all the time, why didn't you just reject it? We wouldn't have a case for rejecting this plan change. Do you want to just confirm why, it's in the report?
Not in our view and in our assessment of the information provided.
Yep, so our only option here is to accept with the ability to give a submission and be strong on things like infrastructure and water care.
Well, no, I think the other options are available to you. What I'm saying is that our recommendation is that the other options don't stack up, that it passes the tests to go to the next, to go through the close 25 stage and go to the hearing stage.
Yeah, sorry, I sort of didn't mean we had no option, but I guess your advice is we wouldn't have the evidence for those other options.
Not in my view, no.
Yeah, cool, thank you. Right, I'll get you just officers to step away from the table, and that's just the additional chair's recommendation there around the infrastructure requirements. So that's just saying we will put in a submission around all the concerns that we've heard today and that are in the agenda. Right, debate, Councillor Walker.
I'm happy to move, and I'll just speak to this incredibly briefly. I'm broadly supportive of what's proposed because it really was never suited to residential development, certainly not residential development in a floodplain. But it is an incredibly sensitive area. It's highly visible from the motorway, and there are constraints, as have been indicated, as far as sewage is concerned. There are existing problems now in respect of wet weather flows and discharges into the environment in extreme events. So I have a huge concern around the capacity of the sewage network to cope with additional demand over and above what's already happening in Milldale, Weetie, Silverdale infill, Rewa West, and infill on Whangaproa. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? Nope, I think that's pretty straightforward. All those in favour?
Aye.
Any opposed? Councillor Turner would like to abstain. Thank you. Right, we move on to item 12, I think it is. This is a very clear status update. I'll move. Councillor Walker second. All those in favour? Any opposed? No. 13 is similar. Councillor Walker move. Have a seconder. Councillor Foley second. All those in favour? Right. And I see, unfortunately, Rachel has had to go to a midwife appointment. Just wanted to acknowledge Rachel, who is my councillor support advisor and a councillor support advisor to, I think, Councillor Stewart as well. She will be leaving in a couple of weeks, or before the next meeting anyway, to have a baby. So just, if you see her on the floor on 26, congratulate her before she goes, and just want to acknowledge the work she does, dealing with my millions of emails, but also dealing and helping on this committee quite significantly as well. So send regards to Rachel. Right, we'll move to confidential. I'll move. Councillor Walker second. All those in favour? Right, we'll just wait we'll have a 5-minute break to clear the room and turn the recording equipment. All right, yes, and members online, could you please move to the other link if you're staying on for this item?